Hello, everybody. Father Scott Vanderveer here with another installment in our short series on aging gracefully and making our way through the developmental stages of our ages. Something important for us to know is that there's a widely held perennial belief, a body of knowledge, that no matter who you are, there are two distinct tasks in life. You have to do something wonderful and consequential with your one beautiful, precious life. We have to do something with our lives to use what God gave us effectively and efficiently and well. But we also have to let go of all of that so that we can live our true essence as children of God who are on earth for a short time and whose lifespan is so much longer, is actually eternal. The work you do in part one is very different from the work you do in part two. And you have to do part one first, but there's no guarantee you'll ever get to part two. People die without ever even knowing about part two. That's not a terribly unusual phenomenon, that someone never knew about part two at all and never pursued it and never was able to grow to that level. So if we were to talk about this, many of the people who write about it, including the Franciscan Father Richard Rohr, the Oblate Father Ron Rolheiser, and many others who are building on a long history of knowledge about this important developmental reality for humans. All of them talk about it to make it as simple as possible as the two halves of life. The first half is one in which we need to learn how to discipline and contain ourselves so that we can take the roaring bonfire that comes to us through our life force and hone it into something that can be used as a blowtorch. But then we need to let that bonfire be absorbed by the great fire of God. So I don't want to get too poetic here. I think I better make it a little bit clearer. In the first half of life, we learn about rules and we learn about ways to be. We have to be disciplined. We have to be good. We have to be put through a system of formation that allows us to be contributors to the human family. And then in the second half of life, we need to work on letting go of everything we've built so that when we die, we are ready for heaven and ready to let go of what no longer fits us. In an earlier video you might have watched, you heard me say that we need to be doing the work that's developmentally appropriate for the stage we're in. Toddlers who are tantruming don't need therapy. They just need a nap or a snack. And teenagers who are being rebellious aren't necessarily doing something wrong. They're doing something developmentally appropriate. Well, it's important in the first half of life to be obedient and disciplined, to be working towards success, to be working hard, to be using all of our energies to the best of our ability, to go to bed tired every night. We've got to build and strive. We've got to find the mate that's right for us or the vocation that is the right and appropriate thing for us to do. We have to then raise those children or contribute to what the world is providing for us. And then we need to jackhammer at that so that we can have a retirement, so that we can give money to charitable causes, so that we can take care of our parents as they get old while taking care of our children while they're young. The first half of life is perhaps best exemplified if we're going to live it successfully, like a West Point cadet. Disciplined, up early, physical training, mental training, ability to say no to oneself so that you can say yes to what life is asking of you. That person is going to go on to do wonderful things. They're going to go on to make the world a different and better place. They're going to make their mark. People who work hard and go to college do that, or people who work hard and get a trade, and then they become the best mechanic or the best plumber or the best painter known, and they use their efforts to the max. They use their youthful energies to just go wild. But there comes a point, we often refer to it as a midlife crisis, where that's not going to work anymore. We no longer can remember what we were building for because our needs are changing. Our bodies aren't able to respond to the discipline the way that they did. And we may find that the appetites we had when we were younger that we needed to constrain and discipline, they're not there in the same way anymore. We're not striving to be the best in class. We're not always jealous of other people and trying to outdo them. We're not necessarily interested in making a name for ourselves in the same way. We no longer maybe have the need to be gluttonous about consuming the good things of life or lustful in the way that we approach relationships. So that's really interesting because what it means in a nutshell is that the work of the first half of life is to create a container for our egos. We have to have an ego strong enough that we can live in the world and make a difference. We need to be a person that we were created to be. And then in the second half of life, we have to focus on our soul. The ego is shaped by being contained and sculpted. The soul requires expansion. So that, my friends, is the best of the news we could ever have if we're wondering what's ahead for me? What am I supposed to do with my life? You're supposed to use the first half of your life to contain your ego, and the second half of your life to expand your soul. If you think about that, it actually starts to make sense. In the 10 Commandments, some of the commandments are very clearly speaking to the young person working on the tasks of the first half of life. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not lie. Very clear rules that are meant to talk about the passions. You experience rage, you're not allowed to kill. You experience lust, you're not allowed to commit adultery or fornicate. You experience temptation to rise to the top of the pack, you're not allowed to lie. Some of the other commandments are unintelligible to someone in that first part of life. Someone in West Point or before doesn't really know how to live commandments like, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods besides me. Someone in the first half of life thinks that they're following that commandment by not worshiping Baal, the pagan god that's talked about in the Bible. They think they're doing it by not calling some foreign deity God, or saying that God is one among many. They think that is what fulfills that commandment. But of course, anyone in the second half of life knows that's not what that commandment is saying at all. That commandment is saying, don't make a god out of your success. Don't make a god out of money. Don't make a god out of pleasure. Don't make a god out of power. You can have only one God, and God is inviting you to follow, not to lead. That's the second half of life commandment. Honor your father and mother. In the first half of life, it's very clear that that means do your chores, come home by curfew, don't ever talk to them disrespectfully. But honoring our father and mother later in life means to build on the sacrifices that they've made, to become the kind of person who is a blessing in the life of others and not just someone who is making an impact or making a splash. There's so many commandments like that, including not coveting. Not coveting means being disciplined in the first half of life. I shouldn't want that. I shouldn't want to take something that's not mine. But in the second half of life, it means I actually have a burning need to want less. I have a burning need to own less. That's when you find people, when I go to my parents' house, they're always like, honey, take this, clean out anything in the basement. It's all, do you want that? Take it. Because they have, not only have they given up the need to have, they've developed a need not to have. Do you see? So there's so much to unpackage here, but there's something important for us to know about that. The second half of life is not inevitable. And in this series, I'll talk a little bit about how we have to be aware that the first half of life is tempting enough that we could want to do it for our whole life. And that is not what God wants for us. So we have to figure out how to outgrow the tasks of the first half of life so that we can live faithfully in the second half. What an adventure this living life is. What a blessing for God to have chosen us to do it. Thank you for being on this journey with me. May God bless you all.